All right, more Velikovsky. So at this point, we're picking back up the story where Venus is approaching Earth, and Venus is basically crossing over Earth's orbital path around the sun. So what's happening is that as Venus approaches Earth, remember, it's going into hardcore comet mode. And so that's where we start to see things like a huge pillar of fire. And that would be what the Exodus describes, for example. So as Venus approaches Earth, its electromagnetic field is interacting with Earth's electromagnetic field. And what that does is that it throws Venus into comet mode. Now, I don't know what was going on with Earth at this point in time, because obviously all humans are stuck on Earth and all witnesses are basically being inundated by all of these catastrophes going on while Venus is running close by. So we don't know exactly how Earth looked like from third perspective. Obviously, unless there is an alien out there that wants to provide me with the video from their ship, then we're screwed in that regard. Alright, so in this part of the story, what's happening is that Venus is doing its first major approach towards Earth. There are two major approaches that Venus has with Earth over the course of a 52-year interval. And there are two main ones. Now, there are tons of other ones actually that happened before this and after this, but those other events are either not destructive or they don't really matter at all, or the effects of their approaches are less. Because imagine this, you have the two planets orbiting around, they're trying to get into their orbits that they have now. They're trying to find that equilibrium with respect to the solar system. Because remember, it's not just Venus that's going off course and going all over the place. Or I guess I shouldn't say off course. It has no course yet. Venus's orbit, just like all the other planets' orbits, they're still settling. Now, I don't know what the orbits of the other planets were at this point in time. That's difficult to figure out because at this point in time in human memory, humans are being inundated by Venus's smoke trail or its comet tail from when it's going through all of this, on top of all of the other catastrophes that are happening on Earth, volcanism, etc. Our witness testimony gets rough around here, so it's difficult to say where all the other planets were. But for sure, Venus is in the mix messing with us. So as Venus is trying to settle into its new orbital path closer to the sun where it is, it crosses Earth's orbit. Now, that also means that at some point in time, Venus's orbit was beyond Earth's orbit, and that's correct. And that's why when the further back we go in time, that's why we find all of our ancient ancestors' star charts and stuff, they're all different than from what we see today. And so that's why mainstream scientists and cosmologists and historians are so quick to call our ancestors dumb, because they say, well, I mean, it's weird, they don't say it's weird, they don't admit any of this. They just say, well, they knew they were planets, but they were too stupid to figure out the actual orbit. But the fact that they even admit that our ancestors knew what a planet even was, I mean, that, our ancestors obviously knew what was going on back then. Anyway, so at this stage in Velikovsky's recounting, he is just going over all of the effects that are happening to Earth during this encounter. And they don't necessarily go in a specific order because there's a lot of stuff that happens simultaneously. So in this next part, we're going to go over more of the effects that would happen and did happen and that our ancestors recount happening during this event. Chapter 3. The Hurricane. The swift shifting of the atmosphere under the impact of the gaseous parts of the comet, the drift of air attracted by the body of the comet, and the rush of the atmosphere resulting from inertia when the Earth stopped rotating or shifted its poles, all contributed to produce hurricanes of enormous velocity and force, and of worldwide dimensions. Manuscript Troano and other documents of the Mayas describe a cosmic catastrophe during which the ocean fell upon the continent and a terrible hurricane swept the earth. The hurricane broke up and carried away all towns and all forests. Exploding volcanoes, tides sweeping over mountains, and impetuous winds threatened to annihilate mankind. and actually did annihilate many species of animals. The face of the earth changed, mountains collapsed, other mountains grew and rose over the onrushing cataract of water driven from oceanic spaces. Numberless rivers lost their beds, and a wild tornado moved through the debris descending from the sky. The end of the world age was caused by Huracan, the physical agent that brought darkness and swept away houses and trees and even rocks and mounds of earth. From this name is derived hurricane, the word we use for a strong wind. Huracan destroyed the major part of the human race. In the darkness swept by wind, resinous stuff fell from the sky and participated with fire and water in the destruction of the world. For 5 days, save for the burning naphtha and burning volcanoes, the world was dark, since the sun did not appear. Now this is the amazing stuff. Like, this literal paragraph right here describes all the amount of insane stuff going on. And this is from the Mayan perspective. So we've gotten all kinds of cultures' perspectives in this book so far, which is great. But this whole little paragraph right there describes only what is from the Mayan manuscript Troano. Sorry, not sure how to pronounce that. I mean, these guys have everything from literally the ocean being ripped up and flowing across the land, islands, mountains being just falling into the ocean, just being over, and then you have other mountains just growing out of the earth as the earth is twisted. The strata of the earth is just being put under tremendous stress, and this literally causes mountains to rise up overnight, instantly, right there in front of people. So, for example, this is where the Andes come from. That's the mountain range in South America that runs all along the western side. Now, even mainstream geology they actually admit that the Andes had to rise quickly. But the question is how? Because plate tectonics, that doesn't really offer an explanation, because as we all know, plate tectonics, they take 8 trillion years to do anything. But that's not what the geological evidence shows for the Andes. Now, all the people living in South America during the time of the Venus event all recall and remember the time when the Andes were raised, and they were raised overnight. So it's interesting to see that even mainstream admits that it has to happen quickly, but you can see the incredible amount of cope that a mainstream geologist has to go through to try and explain away the fact that the evidence for the Andes Mountains shows that they did indeed rise up extremely quickly, right? Because that ruins their entire narrative, and anything that ruins the mainstream scientific narrative is instantly not allowed to be talked about. But it's funny, you can't ignore the evidence, and they don't in a lot of their articles. Alright, I'll do another show on the Andes. That stuff is hilarious. And the other thing that is interesting is that this document, it even recounts all the different kind of naphtha that falls from the sky. Even over here in the Central America, South America area, they're being inundated with oil and bitumen and stuff as well. So even these guys are recording it. So the question we have to ask the mainstream is, why do these two separate continents both record oil and burning pitch and stuff falling from the sky at exactly the same period of time? So first of all, the fact that any culture on the planet at any point in time in history is already insane. And it's amazing that you have multiple cultures around the planet backing each other up on this, and this is during a time when none of these cultures are supposed to be able to communicate with one another. So how did they know that oil was falling from the sky? How did they all know this, right? The only way they could have known this is if they all experienced it. Here, let's keep reading what he has to say, because this is actually a very important part, and it goes beyond the Belikovsky stuff. This whole situation with oil raining down from the sky, it's a legitimate problem, and it's a legitimate recounting in everybody's history. Here, let's go on with Belikovsky, and then if we have time, we'll come back to it. All right, back to the hurricane. The theme of a cosmic hurricane is reiterated time and again in the Hindu Vedas and in the Persian Avesta and diluvium venti, the deluge of wind, is a term known from many ancient authors. In the section The Darkness, I quoted rabbinical sources on the exceedingly strong west wind that endured for 7 days when the land was enveloped in darkness, and the hieroglyphic inscription from El Arish about 9 days of upheaval, when there was such a tempest that nobody could leave the palace or see the faces of those beside them, and the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which says that 6 days and a night the hurricane, deluge, and tempest continued sweeping the land, and mankind perished almost together. In the battle of the planet god Marduk with Tiamat, he, Marduk, created the evil wind, and the tempest, and the hurricane, and the fourfold wind, and the sevenfold wind, and the whirlwind, and the wind which had no equal. The Maoris narrate that amid a stupendous catastrophe, the mighty winds, the fierce squalls, the clouds, dense, dark, fiery, wildly drifting, wildly bursting, rushed on creation. In their midst, Tawiri Mati, father of winds and storms, and swept away giant forests and lashed the waters into billows, whose crests rose high like mountains. The earth groaned terribly, and the ocean fled. The earth was submerged in the ocean, but was drawn by Tafafanua, relate the Aborigines of Paumotu in Polynesia. The new isles were baited by a star. In the month of March, the Polynesians celebrate a god, Tafanua. In Arabic, typhoon is a whirlwind, and tufan is the deluge. And the same word occurs in Chinese as taifeng. It appears as though the noise of the hurricane was overtoned by a sound not unlike the name typhoon, as if the storm were calling him by name. So basically, whatever the amount of energy that was flowing around the planet displacing the atmosphere and creating a typhoon type of area, man, that has to be one hell of a sound to make. Could you imagine hearing that? Just some sort of planet wrenching, just typhoon. It's crazy. It's crazy. All right, we'll go on. But see, everybody has the same word. And see, mainstream people ignore that. Like, what the... all right. The cosmic upheaval proceeded with a mighty strong west wind. But before the climax, in the simple words of the scriptures, the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites were on the shore of the Sea of Passage at the climax of the cataclysm. The name Jam Suf is generally related as Red Sea. The passage is supposed to have taken place either at the Gulf of Suez or at Aqaba Gulf of the Red Sea. But sometimes the site of the passage is identified as one of the inner lakes on the route from Suez to the Mediterranean. A couple of things really quick to go over. So for those of you who do study the Bible, what's interesting, or even if you don't, it's still interesting, is that they do not technically still know what sea was parted. Like, we don't have that location. I don't think a lot of people understand that that location is not pinpointed anywhere. And because of this cataclysm, you'll probably never find it, because the earth was completely just destroyed during this situation, right? The other thing really fast that he said is he says that, or the Polynesians state that the star baited the islands. What they mean by that is that they're saying that when Venus passed over, they call a planet star, it was an interchangeable part in their language. When the star passed over, that the islands were literally ripped up out of the ocean. They were pulled up. They were baited out of the waters. That's what he meant when he said, that's what they mean when they say it. It is argued that Suf means reed, papyrus reed, and since papyrus reed does not grow in salt water, Jam Suf must have been a lagoon of fresh water. We will not enter here into a discussion where the Sea of the Passage was. The inscription on the shrine found at El Arish may provide some indication where Pharaoh was engulfed by the whirlpool. In any event, the topographical distribution of sea and land did not remain the same as before the cataclysm of the days of the Exodus. But the name of the Sea of the Passage, Jam Suf, is derived not from reed, but from hurricane. Suf, Sufa in Hebrew. In Egyptian, the Red Sea is called Shari, which signifies the Sea of Percussion, Mer Percussionis, or the Sea of the Stroke, or of the Disaster. The Haggadah of Passover says, "Thou didst sweep the land of Moph and Noph on the Passover." Isn't that amazing that like even all these religious recountings, they're literally, it's right there in front of us. I mean, if we didn't stop everybody, you guys got to stop looking at your religious texts as if they're all just euphemisms or alliterations or whatever. Take this stuff seriously. If for no other reason, do it for fun. And for those of you who are atheists out there, do it too. It's a good intellectual exercise. Why not, right? All right. The hurricane that brought an end to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, the blast of heavenly displeasure, in the language of Manetho, swept through every corner of the world. In order to distinguish in the traditions of the peoples this diluvium venti of cosmic dimensions from local disastrous storms, other cosmic disturbances like disappearance of the sun or change of the sky must be found accompanying the hurricane. In the Japanese cosmogonical myth, the sun goddess hid herself for a long time in a heavenly cave in fear of the storm god. The source of light disappeared, the whole world became dark, and the storm god caused monstrous destruction. Gods made terrible noise so that the sun should reappear, and from their tumult the earth quaked. In Japan and in the vast extent of the ocean, hurricanes and earthquakes are not rare occurrences, but they do not disturb the day-night succession, nor is there any resulting permanent change in the sky and its luminaries. The sky was low, relate the Polynesians of Takafo Island, and then the winds and waterspouts and the hurricanes came and carried up the sky to its present height. There's a lot of interesting things here really quick about sky heights, because we all know kind of that story of, oh, the sky is falling, and that has instantly been written off by everybody as some sort of like a fairy tale or a child's story or whatever. But what's interesting is that during these cataclysms, when Earth is having a close encounter with another planetary body, and what you would see is not only you have all the debris going on and all of this stuff, but you're also going to have the atmospheres of the planets being pulled towards one another. So as an atmosphere is being pulled, here's my question. If an atmosphere is being pulled towards Venus, let's say the Earth's atmosphere, just hypothetically, it probably did happen to one degree, or we know for a fact at some point in time, this may have been during the Saturnian configuration, but that atmospheres really were starting to be elongated and stretched between one another. As an atmosphere gets pulled towards another body, what happens? So like here, let's set this up. So if a planetary body is having its atmosphere pulled up north, right? Like that's the main body that it's being pulled towards. What does the south look like? Like what does their atmosphere sky look like? I mean, would you literally kind of get the impression that your sky is getting closer and closer to you? I honestly believe that's what these people are describing, I think. Now that's just speculation, but I wonder. I don't hear anybody talk about the atmosphere and how, the atmosphere height would change, but it would change. So what happens if you see part of your atmosphere, if part of the atmosphere is being extended and stretched towards another body, that means the other side of the planet is having its atmosphere reduced in size. What does that look like? That's actually something I'm very curious about. And so I think I think, that when you see cultures talking about the sky falling, they're not necessarily just relating to, say, like a meteor shower or something. Now, that definitely is the case, because you do have a lot of that going on. But one of the other things that they talk about with the sky is they talk about the sky coming low. The sky came low. The sky came in close. There's even a point to where cultures have to push the sky back up to where it originally was. Now, the sky coming in close is way different than pieces of a sky falling down. So I actually wonder if our ancestors, depending on where you were on the planet, actually saw the atmosphere come closer to the ground. And what a trip that would be. Alright, we'll keep going. We're almost done with this one. When a world cycle is destroyed by wind, says the Buddhist text on the world cycles, the wind also turns the ground upside down and throws it into the sky. And areas of 100 leagues in extent, 200, 300, 500 leagues in extent crack and are thrown upward by the force of the wind, and do not fall again, but are blown to powder in the sky and annihilated. And the wind throws up also into the sky the mountains which encircle the earth. They are ground to powder and destroyed. The cosmic wind blows and destroys 100,000 times 10 million worlds. So basically, these guys are telling you this event that happened was mind-bogglingly destructive. Like, the best way to say it is that not only, it's just world destroying. Not only is it just destroying the Earth, but any world, doesn't matter. And it's not the only world being affected, because they can see the other planetary body up there as well. So this is the crazy stuff. This ends the section on the hurricane, and we'll kind of call it here. But the takeaway from this is that as we're having all of these other events that would go on if a planetary body passes us by, Venus in this case, you would have earthquakes. You would have volcanic activity, right? We talk about the water itself, the oceans being drug around the planet. So you would have now an excuse to talk about how there possibly could have been an Exodus situation where the sea is parted. Even more interesting is that we have other peoples talking about a parted Red Sea here in North America. Now, that's a different topic. But the fact that that exists kind of shows that lots of people were around and saw events like this as well. Even if it wasn't the exact same event, people all over the place would have been seeing all of these water events taking place. So not only do you have all of those events taking place simultaneously, but then you also have these people talking about what would be happening to, like, the gases on the planet. What would be happening to the atmosphere? What would the effects be, right? And what would the effects be of the inertia of the planet changing, right? Of your angular momentum being altered. What happens to the gas on Earth? Oxygen, all that stuff. What happens to it? Well, all of these guys have the story about this as well. It's baked into their cataclysmic stories. So if these people did not experience these cataclysms, and they were apparently also dumb cavemen, how are they knocking this out of the park scientifically? How are they able to make up all of these stories and make them perfectly in tune with what we would expect from a scientific point of view if this were to happen? See, this is the kind of stuff that is ignored in the mainstream, and it's ignored by pretty much everybody because it sounds fantastical, right? I know it's hard to believe this stuff at first, but do you really need to have this stuff happening every single day to you to believe that it can happen? No, you don't. But just because it's not happening right now doesn't mean it never happened. So don't forget that when you're doing your research. I don't care where you fall on the spectrum here in your research. Hardcore religious, hardcore atheist, hardcore mainstream, hardcore new alt, whatever. Doesn't matter. Don't forget to keep an open mind as you do your studies and as you execute your research. Don't just hand wave stuff that sounds crazy initially, because there's a lot of that. I get that, and it's not always easy to, you know, kind of get into it and look into it. But that, I guarantee you, that's probably one of the reasons why you're not advancing like you would like to within your studies, is because you've hand waved off evidence and or information that is relative to your topic that would have set you on the right path. I can't even imagine how many talented researchers we have probably lost throughout the ages because they didn't want to take some of the stuff more seriously because they thought it was ridiculous or because they thought it didn't have merit, simply because of their, you know, their schooling, because of how they were taught. Anyway, so don't do that. Don't be afraid to take in these ideas. Also, you like how it took me 25 minutes to read 2 pages? Oh yeah, I gotta shut up. Alright, next part is going to start talking about the tides. Alright, that'll be part 8.